Now let's move on to our next topic for this afternoon, and this one is titled Gazing into the Deep Engineering Crystal Ball. Well, this session is supposed to offer us a peek into the fascinating future of the deep tech startup ecosystems, and it's brought to you by IEEE, otherwise known as the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineer. Speaking at this session is Miss Kelly Hoey. She's the author of Build Your Dream Network. Now, Kelly has been lauded by Forbes as one of the 5 women changing the landscape of venture capital and entrepreneurship. EBW 2020, that's an organization otherwise known as Empowering a Billion Women. Well, that organization has included her in their list of 100 most influential global leaders empowering women worldwide. Moderating this session is Ms. Randi Sumner. She's the Senior Director of Strategy and Entrepreneurship at IEEE. And this session will explore the opportunity spaces that allow companies to continue to innovate, while at the same time bridging the gap between deep tech and the human experience. It's going to be a fascinating one. Over to you, ladies.
I'm Randi Sumner, and I'm so excited to be here with Kelly Hoey. Kelly, it's been several years since we shared a stage together, and there is so much to talk about in the world of serial entrepreneurship, investment, and most importantly for us, what's happening in the world in relation to the company that you launched in that in-between time, Build Your Dream Network. So please, Kelly, tell us a little bit about your take on the opportunities that businesses, startup, and technology organizations have because of this disruption that's happened to all of us.
Oh yeah, and it's so good to see you, Randi. I know we're not on the stage in Pittsburgh, but this will do. Well, I think this is, you know what? This is a horrifying time, but it is also a really interesting and exciting time. I think what we're realizing right now is, the technology we've been playing around on the edges of, that's like our uses of it are accelerating, but we're also realizing like how important people are. And I think we're longing for those human experiences. So for me right now, what I'm looking at is how are we using technology to create better human experiences? How are we using technology to facilitate the human experience? How can we do things so that we as human beings can connect? Because, for some people, I mean, we can't wait to get on an airplane and travel again. And other people, I think they've just said, that's enough. I'm not going to do that anymore. But we need these two things. I'm going to say humanity and technology. We need innovation to bridge those and improve the experience and accessibility for all of us.
So let's talk a little bit about the technology, and then we can talk about the human interaction as part of that. So my first thought is, what are some of the technology, instead of talking about platforms or tools like the one that we're on right now, but the actual things like AV, VR, what are the opportunities that you see that will help people connect and will help businesses thrive?
Well, I think, this is such a great question. And one of the things I'm thinking about right now is like the whole retail disruption and the consumer journey that is, there's no consumer funnel now, as, my friend Tara Hunt would say. It's just like this, messy, convoluted consumer journey that between research and social media and this experience that we maybe used to go into the stores for, but now we need to have some other way. And, one of the areas which I think, I sort of think about companies and they should be learning from is like the beauty industry. Because the beauty industry has been using, I want to say sort of virtual reality. Like I remember going into Nordstrom's and trying on lipsticks without trying on lipsticks because of the technology. How can other companies learn from that and say, right, what's our consumer journey? How can we give people this experience? So now in an era where we may be a little bit sort of phobic about, buying something, how can I try something on without trying it on? How can it work for me in a, how can I see it and experience in a virtual reality way? Or how could I, through virtual reality, navigate my way through a space before I physically have to go through that space, so I know where, so to speak, the touch points are. So how can we learn from that? So I think companies that have been reticent to try these things now need to go and say, right, I don't need to see that kind of I want to say that the way some companies have been about, oh, are my competitors using this? It's like,
Right.
no, go look at other industries who are wholly embracing AR and VR and say, right, what are they doing? And how does that relate to my customer? The service I do, what can we do? And, if you don't have the research and development department, you don't have the innovators, like go and work with startups, go and try some of these companies who are doing interesting things and collaborate and partner and see what's possible.
Right.
Because I think it's one of those things, Randy, if 2-3 years from now we were sitting here having this conversation again, we could probably have a laundry list of the companies that no longer exist because they haven't innovated. And I think,
Right.
it's sort of like innovate or you're going to go the way of the dinosaur, pure and simple.
Right. And that might be about finding ways to innovate internally with the team of people that you have right now, or it might be
Right.
going after those startups and pulling them into the conversation, as you said, looking at what are the products and services that are out there that are utilizing this as an opportunity, and focusing on disruption for growth chances as opposed to getting all afraid and pulling back.
Right. Like
so
who's your customer and how are they living their lives? Who are you serving? I mean, think about your own life, what you're doing. And, so how are you having that? I mean, it sounds stupid to say this in this day and age, but you still go to websites, on your mobile device that are the clunkiest thing you've ever, it's like, come on, like we're beyond.
And I think we are absolutely seeing it. So there was a news story very recently about, for instance, Eastman Kodak, the core company that started film developing and 35 millimeter, completely changing. Of course, it went bankrupt but it's coming back again in this era of COVID and rebranding itself as a chemical company, which is what it always was. It was just a chemical company about film, and instead now a chemical company producing devices and systems that will help fight COVID. So, what are some other lessons like that you've seen in recent media?
But Kodak is such a brilliant example. Here was one of an iconic brand, one of the most valued brands, and they considered themselves one thing back in the day. They thought of themselves as one thing. We are a film company. What happens if they thought of themselves as a memory company? What happens if they thought of themselves in a different way? They could have been the ones inventing Instagram instead of Instagram inventing Instagram. Correct. But they were so siloed and limited. And, it's unfortunate that, I would say that loss of brand value, there's a name and iconic status, but they were, maybe they got too cozy, maybe they got too comfy. But I think it's a great lesson that you can, I want to say resurrect a brand. You can reinvent, correct. But why don't you try and sit back and think bigger about what you are? I mean, they could still be what they are today, a chemical company in that regard. But they also could have been the inventors of Instagram. They could have been also inventors of a whole lot of other things in our era where they could have been the leaders on visual search instead of Pinterest.
So the lesson is think outside the box, challenge yourself. Right? Challenge yourself. What's the opportunity space? Go talk to startup CEOs, go talk to your peers, talk to the lowest folks on the totem pole in your company, and ask them, what's their personal experience. So let's transition a little bit to people, because this is really what we're really talking about at its core. How do we provide value for our customers? How do we ensure that our people that are working with us and for us are excited about the work that we're doing, that believe that it's going to last through this disruption and scale perhaps instead of dwindle? So what are some of your thoughts on the things that employers need to do, especially technology companies, to rise to this challenge?
Well, I mean, you go back to Kodak, and it's a great example. And I think you need to, technology companies, whether you're a little company or a big company, you need to look around and see who's around the table and who's bringing the ideas to the table and who's, suggesting ideas, who's amplifying ideas, and who's, vetoing ideas. If you're sitting around a table with a bunch of people who look like you, think like you, you're not getting the best ideas. You're not don't add on innovation as an afterthought in terms of innovation of who is bringing the ideas and the suggestions and the solutions. Don't add on, oh, we should have a woman on our board because, our product's for females. Like, come on. In this day and age, there's no excuse not to have the strongest, most diverse team around the table. You're going to have better products and services. You're not going to have these blind spots. You're not going to end up in this echo chamber. So I think it's incumbent on every single company. And I'm to get excited about this topic. This is me speaking as an investor.
Right.
I want the best return on my investment. And I'm only going to get that if you've got diversity around the management team, you've got diversity around the board team, and you've got diversity within your company.
So let's talk about what diversity actually means, right? Because there's diversity, equity, inclusion in both your board and the companies that you want to invest in, as well as in how you focus on your potential customer base. So I know one of the things that you and I have talked about is this fact that technology companies need to think about how do they deliver to that diverse audience that might not be abled exactly the same as them, that might, be neurodiverse,
Right.
that might need other tools than, the ones that we're using right now to talk to each other. So can we talk a little bit about your thoughts on the vision for the future of what they need to do to stay successful?
Well, I think it's this idea that they can't just say we had a focus group. I think you've got to spend the time and the effort to find, I want to say, the people for your team who maybe are living and breathing the experience. And I'm thinking of a pitch event I was at and I was judging, and someone was creating a technology for the visually impaired. And they said that, like the founder, volunteered and read to blind children or, something like that. And that's where the idea came from. And my only question to them is, who on your team is blind? And they're like, well, no, but the founder. I'm like, time out, like, end of discussion. I don't need to hear any more. I'm not interested anymore in this technology because you haven't spent the time and the effort. So I think you have to challenge yourself to say there's no one out. If you say there's no one out there, you're not looking hard enough. I think if you're not, also expanding your mind on who is the possibility of who would be good on your team, right? So look at your job descriptions, think about what you're hiring for, and whether you now have pigeonholed yourself. And by pigeonholing yourself, you're not producing the greatest product. I think of a head of technology, it was at Bank of America, and she told the story of being young in her career and needing to mentor a military vet. And she was young in your career and she was probably thinking, oh God, I'm the woman, they're getting me to do the mentoring. And this guy, he had nerve damage in his arms from his service. And she's like, oh, and he can't code as fast. And the language that goes in our brain, like, you burden me and you need to produce this. And it ends up, she said, at the end of the day, she said, I realized he was a better coder than me. Because what I coded in 200 lines, he coded in 20 because he needed to think more and create more beautiful, productive code because he couldn't code as fast. So we need to think about our what and who is productive. And how are we measuring productivity? And how are we looking at creativity? So for everything from, your hiring interviews and what you're asking people to do, particularly technologists, and say, hold on a minute here. We're assuming 200 lines of code is productive. Maybe 20 is. And maybe we should look at this differently.
I want to kind of circle back to IEEE and to Switch for a moment, because one of the things that we're looking at for this particular audience is, a wide range of technology people in all sectors. And that the idea of disruption in people is part of this Switch conversation and engineering at its core with IEEE. So what are some last kind of messages that you want to make sure they take home about what you see as the future, not just right now in this diverse, decentralized, all at home, but what's some of the opportunity space that they're going to be seeing in 6 months or a year, and you as an investor are thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the possibilities are really endless right now. And the things I look at really, Randy, are how is technology improving our human experience? How are you doing things that are bringing people together, not driving us apart? How are you creating products that have people and I want to say community at the core, and not using technology as some sort of a substitute for our human need to connect meaningfully to each other. So I'd say to people, think about how, we always wonder, being my little take my investor hat off and put my networking hat
I was
on.
just going to say the Build Your Dream Network is important here.
But also, so much with networking, we're always, in people networking, the networking I primarily talk about, we're always wondering and we're always worried about how we're entering conversations. And what I want to challenge everyone now with your technology, with your human interactions, ask yourself, am I bringing people into the conversation? And if I'm not, then what am I going to do about it?
Right.
There's my big challenge.
It's the business equivalent of not living your life in a solo environment, right? Don't allow the departments in your company to not interact with each other. The same thing. Don't allow the people to not talk about the future together, because we have to constantly build that conversation. Whether you're a tiny startup or whether you're a large multinational company. Any last words of wisdom before we tie this up and talk about the December event?
I think we've touched on it, and you know what? This is where global organizations like the IEEE are so valuable, because you have such a broad and diverse audience and membership, and people should be leveraging those kind of and I would say events like this one, where you have the opportunity to connect with so many different people and take advantage of every single tool you can to do that.
Kelly, as always, thank you for giving your outlook on the future. You yourself are a disruptor with Build Your Dream Network, with every company you've ever touched, and certainly with the engineering-driven community with IEEE, you've been a helper and a support. I've been really happy to talk to you today a little bit about the future of technology and the Switch event, and I look forward to talking to you again in the next couple of months. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks for having me.